welcome! Starting today's video here by the compost bins, because this particular end compost bin is giving me a great variety of volunteer plants. We have the potatoes growing. I have no idea what variety, but it looks like they're going to give me a nice crop. It's got some breadseed poppies sprouting up at the bottom here, and round this side next to me a lovely bushy thicket of lemon balm. If we take a closer look in at the top, that potato's really going to town. Here's another compost bin sprouting volunteers, and this one has lettuces growing in it. A nice variegated leaf lettuce. So if the rabbits don't get it, an extra free snack for me. Very nicely, we've had a few days of dry weather. Yesterday I was able to get out and finish cutting some grass to cover the new planting space I had started covering last week. The cardboard I had left, exposed and uncovered, actually survived very well for the week, without any grass on top of it. In one of my newly covered grassy spaces, there is already this Paulownia tree. It's just starting to sprout some new leaves. So lots of lovely fuzzy new growth. Now the planting spaces I have just started in the past few weeks are probably a little immature to be putting plants into yet. But I have 3 decent sized beds that I actually covered with grass last autumn. Last autumn? No, it was late in the summer, so we weren't quite autumn time yet. I've already put lots of the dahlia tubers into one of those beds, and I've now been scrabbling around my plant supplies to get some plants together to go into these beds. Long term, I want to be filling them with perennial plants that will just pop up year after year. Need some weeding, the occasional dividing, but hopefully for most of the time they can pretty much take care of themselves. This year I will be filling quite a bit of the space with annual nasturtiums and sunflowers, but I need to get things planted into the ground. Most of the plants I've got here have been in these pots far too long, and they'll do much better in the soil. Well, they're in soil, they do better in open ground. Give them some space for their roots to spread. Now here I've got a peony. It has a pink and yellow flower, and it's been in this pot for about 2 years now, waiting for a new planting position. Peonies don't like being moved, so generally won't flower the first year you move them because they're sulking. But once it's settled in and got established, it'll look splendid. I see it's actually got a little flower bud on at the moment, so maybe it will flower for me this year, because I'm not really digging it up. As I said, it's been sitting in this pot for 2 years. It's going to need a big hole to put it in though. I've got an Arum italicum, a plant I absolutely love. So this gives me these beautiful variegated spring leaves. And there's more of it in this big water trophy thing. I've also got a sedum in here. I don't know the variety of this sedum. It just has a standard pinky sedum flower. These are last year's old flower stalks still here. But it's a nice plant, I like it. I'm growing some new seeds of sedum this year from different varieties, but I don't know what this one is. I've just had it for years. So that'll be going in here as well. Off to the side here, I've got some gladioli that were dug up from one of these areas before I laid all the grass mulch. So I know these will actually overwinter. They're a hardy gladioli. I've got some more random gladioli bulbs, tubers, corms, I'm not sure what you call them, but they need to be going into the ground desperately. They should have been planted weeks ago, along with the dahlias. Now this little fellow is Bear's Britches, one of my new seedling plants. There are actually 2 in this pot, and I have one that germinated in a pot in the polytunnel. So I'm going to risk these 2 outdoors. They should be a hardy perennial that the rabbits and deer don't like to eat. So hopefully, fingers crossed. What else have we got in here? A very tiny hollyhock, Nigra alicia, so it should have very deep purple, almost black flowers. It won't flower this year though, it's far too small. What's this called? A heuchera. Now I have 3 heucheras. I've got a very greeny one, this deep dark bronzy one, and my favourite of all, this purpley variegatey one. Now I have a bigger plant of this right next to the house. So this was a cutting from that last year, or a branchy side shoot that I snapped off and have been nurturing in the house all winter. So I'm looking forward to putting that in. A couple of nasturtium seedlings that had already germinated elsewhere, so I stuck them in this pot. They can go in to give an early start, and I also have lots of nasturtium seeds that I'm going to put in a big cluster, just to fill one of the more new beds and get it covered with something growing. A purple primrose that's supposed to be outdoor hardy. There's lots of yellow primroses hardy outdoors in our area, and I do have a purple primrose that has proven itself to be hardy. So I'm not sure how this one will get on. We're going to stick it in and hope. It was a supermarket purchase earlier this year when it was in full flower. I can actually see it's got another rosette of flowers happening in the middle, so we might get another showing off of this one. And a gazania that was a gift last year, has orange flowers on it. It's got its name still, I think. Gazania Big Kiss Orange Flame. So I have 2 pots of this. My other pot is full of plants still, all looking healthy and wonderful. And this one, I lost 2 of them in an early frost. Got them indoors. So I don't think it will overwinter out here. But I'm going to plant it in the garden and enjoy it for this year. And if next winter's frost kills it off, which I honestly expect it to do, then it does. At least I've had it for this year to enjoy. And I have a second one of it that I'll plant in a more cared for space. Maybe dig up a chunk of it and bring it in for the winter, as I did with this one. I've also got some foxgloves in pots that will be going in here, and quite an arrangement of other things. I just need to get plants in the ground. There's a crocosmia, a yellow flowering crocosmia that was dug up again from one of the places I'm placing grass to make new beds. But in order to weed out all the weeds and grasses that were growing around it, I dug it up to save it, and it'll be replanted. So lots of things to be getting into my new beds. Looks like I'm going to have a busy afternoon of digging holes. Next week it's forecast some showers and overcast weather, which is no surprise, and I'll be very glad for it to help settle these things in. But for today and tomorrow, it's going to be gorgeous. Now there are plants already growing in this grassy meadow area, things I've put in the ground years ago. So we'll go and take a look what's appearing in the long grass. So there's this perennial poppy that has been kept quite well weeded. It was one of the first things I put in, so I know it's here, and I've been keeping an eye on it over the years. It's very nice to see this year it's actually got a second plant doing very nicely next to it. Now I didn't plant 2, just 1. So this is lovely to see it expanding and spreading. I spotted this breadseed poppy pushing itself up through my grassy mulch this spring, so stuck the white stake in next to it so I would know it was there. It's getting nice and big now, so I don't think I can miss it. It put itself here. Well, I threw poppy seed onto this last autumn, so at least one of them has germinated, which is good. Now this is the corner of one new bed that I was preparing last week. It's an oxeye daisy that was already here, so I've mulched around it and plan to get in there and hand weed out some of that grass. I may end up digging it up, weeding around it and replanting it, but there's lots of oxeye daisy all over this meadow that I put in some years ago, and it's spreading fantastically. Oh, that's exciting. Just spotted a few bluebells pushing up through the grass. Wonderful. Now this doesn't look like much, but it's actually a beautiful purple iris. It's just starting to send up some buds. This will be a bud here. But from a distance, it just looks like the rest of the grass it's planted in. Here there is some sort of allium, again just starting to put up some buds. Where are we? There. Now this is looking very good, and unfortunately another plant I don't know the name of. I will have a look, see if I can trace its name and type it onto the screen for you. It's actually doing very nicely this year. It was given to me by another gardener who was having difficulty growing this plant as it was constantly being hammered and munched on by a beetle, a bug, a caterpillar, I'm not sure what, but a specific pest to this plant. I seem to have managed to clear it for now. It's looking really good. Whether its pest will be back in later in the year to decimate the leaves, we will see. And there's quite a few clumps of daffodils, all gone past flowering now. I do spot them every spring and re-mulch around them to keep their clumps clear of the meadow grasses growing in. Oh, and I see another patch of that allium here, and some foxgloves growing in behind. So there's something I am encouraging. Another clump of daffodils, narcissus I think, marked with a bit of a stake. You just wouldn't know it was there when it's not in flower. Now last year I planted some raspberries, Autumn Treasure. They're a thornless raspberry, had a really good flavour when they fruited, so I'm very pleased with them. I try and avoid anything, prickles, thorns, stings, you can't be doing with it. So when I discovered Autumn Treasure thornless raspberry, I just had to plant some. This year I've noticed they're putting out root runners, which I'm actually very happy about. When I got my 5 bare root raspberry plants, I couldn't find out if they were running or clumping. They're obviously runners, because here in the grass next to the raspberry plants are new young shoots popping up. Another one here, and try not to move too fast. There's another one over here. So last week I dug up 2 of my runners, put them in pots to see if I could get them to settle in to a whole new plant. And thankfully they've done really well. One come up quite nicely with a decent amount of root on it. The second one literally had the tiniest little white sprig of a root. It looked really miserable for its first day in a pot, even though it had lots of water. And I suspected it wasn't going to make it. So I was very thrilled the following day to see it standing up straight and strong. And now a week on, they're both doing very nicely. So I think I'll be digging up those 3 little runners I've just shown you and potting them up as well. And I can decide where in the garden I'd like to re-establish them. I'm very happy to expand my raspberries. They're a delicious fruit. And as these are a thornless variety, it won't matter if they run all over the place. They're not going to be causing any sort of major problem, or at least I don't think they will be. My biggest problem with these is the local deer like to nibble on them, which is why I still have this netting around them. It's a bit of a nuisance, but the things we have to do to protect our crops from the deers, the rabbits, the slugs and the snails and the pigeons. No end of wildlife want to attack them. This mass of beautiful white blossom is the cherry tree Stella. Last year I got loads of cherries from this tree, and I usually don't get to harvest them. The tree fruits profusely, but the birds get them all before I do. But last year there were enough cherries for us all to share. It was wonderful. Close up look at the cherry blossom. So pretty. This blueberry bush is covered in little bell-shaped flowers, so hopefully we'll get a blueberry harvest as well. Just noticed the quince is flowering as well. It hasn't flowered for me for a couple of years. It's been suffering with quince leaf blight, and I've been cutting back lots of the affected branches. Its leaves are looking gorgeous at the moment. I'm a bit concerned though. Give it another month, they might be all covered in splotches and dying off. And there's lots of cherry plums on the cherry plum tree. Cherry-sized fruits with a plum-flavoured flesh. It usually has a few fruits. Last year was a bad year for it. I think we must have had a late frost that did for the blossom. But this year I can see lots of little tiny cherry plums. The grapevine is just starting to break bud. So here I've got a grapevine. It has small bunches of grapes on it. The grapes themselves are probably about the size of a black currant. They're very sweet and delicious though. It's quite a few years old now, and I don't prune it or do anything special with it. I just let it ramble along this fence. I do push its branches in against the fence and tie them back. I cut off stray bits that are just getting in the way, but it doesn't get proper grapevine pruning. It's just left to grow and do its own thing. Just starting to break bud. Now I have a second grapevine that's much younger and newer. So here along the fence line I have a second grapevine, much younger. It's only been here a couple of years. A Vitus Muscat Blue, so it's a black grape. I don't know how big the grapes will be. It hasn't had any fruit for me yet, and I'd be quite happy if it didn't fruit this year either. It's still a very small plant. It seems to struggle a bit more than the white grape does. Having said that, it's a lot younger. So outside of the polytunnel on this bench, I have more plants I'm going to put into my new flowering meadow. So this is a balloon plant, has balloon-shaped flower buds that open out to purple and pink flowers, and I don't think it's winter hardy. I've never grown it outside. It's always been in a pot in the polytunnel. I'm going to plant it out into the meadow, but when I do that, I shall keep a smaller chunk of it and repot it into a pot for the polytunnel. It'll grow outdoors in the UK all summer really well, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be winter hardy. But we will see. I'm not planning to dig it up this winter. I'm going to plant it in the meadow garden and see how it gets on. It'll be really good if it survives. There's a fern. There's lots of them grow wild in the hedgerows around here, and I particularly like this one, so I thought that'll be going into the garden as well. There's a couple little trees. I'm not sure where I'm going to put them. Oh, I've forgotten their name. Give me a second. Ginkgo biloba. There we go, got it. Ginkgo biloba, that I started from seed 4 or 5 years ago, and they're still in these little pots. So it's a very slow growing tree, has pretty fan-shaped leaves. So they'll be going into the flowering meadow. Although they're not a flower, they'll give a little bit of height and structure. And tucked in here, now this is a cold hardy geranium that's been in this pot all of last year at least. I was very cross when I put it up on this table. It was on the end here, and each of these red stalky bits actually had a leaf on the end. And then a deer came past and nibbled them all off. I was a bit sad when that happened. It has to be said, I was not happy when I discovered it munched. So I've put it back into the centre of the cluster of plants in the hope the deer won't find the rest of it. Doesn't bode well for planting it in the meadow though. It might be winter hardy. It appears not to be deer hardy. Some more oxeye daisy. I don't know if I'll be planting that into the meadow. There's lots of it already there. And a couple of foxgloves that I dug up when I was digging up the dahlias last autumn. Chucked them in those pots and they're still sitting there. They can definitely go into the flower meadow. Over here in the polytunnel, these are the Veronicas I separated the other week and put them in individual little pots, potted up. And these two pots are the Veronica grandis that didn't get separated and put into their own pots. So because they've been left tightly packed and overcrowded, they're still very small compared to this is one plant, and here I've got about 8 stems. So that gives an idea of how much better your plants will get on if you move them up into that bigger pot and give their roots a bit of space rather than leaving them overcrowded. So I'm actually going to plant these overcrowded ones straight out into the new meadow garden. I shall separate them out and spread them about a bit and give them a chance to grow nice and big and strong like these. And eventually these are going out into the meadow as well. I'll just pop these back in that tray for a moment. Look at these roots coming out the bottom. They desperately want to be out of those pots. I planted my sweet corn into the polytunnel beds yesterday. They're still very tiny, but it's plenty warm enough in here for them to do perfectly well. I'd probably risk planting outdoors now. It's just warmed up enough. The fennel's looking great. It always does. I love this plant in here. I really must move some outdoors and see how it gets on. And behind me, I have a thornless blackberry that moved itself in here last year. I do have thornless blackberry growing outside. Quite how it got into the polytunnel, I'm not entirely sure. But I am liking it in here. It keeps the fruit away from the birds. And again, it's thornless, so not a problem. Lots of flowers on it. So hopefully, lots of blackberries to come. Wow, this fennel's so tall. A particular favourite of mine with the fennel are these little yellow flowers. I love to pick them off and just eat the flowery bits. They taste like those aniseed sweets. Delicious. So it's a regular munch that I just can't resist when I'm in here. A little sweet treat. When I planted the big dahlia tubers out into the new garden space, I had quite a few little tiny bits of tuber left. Well, not bits of, smaller varieties of dahlias that didn't have such big tubers. And I no longer had space in the particular planting bed I was putting them in, so they all got popped into these pots. And most of them seem to be showing signs of germination. I can see 2 empty pots though. So this small dahlia was potted up earlier in the season, and I see it's already starting to show little flower buds. Exciting. I've got some more gladioli in here as well that can go out in the meadow. The strawberry runners I tidied up earlier in the year and put into proper sized pots, doing very nicely. Haven't planted them in the ground though, still sitting in this watering tray. I think they might spend the rest of this year in there. Now my pea plants did actually get a little bit of sun scorch the other day. I don't know if they'd been dripped on by the polytunnel roof, but I think they were just a bit thirsty and it got really hot. So these little end tips of leaves are black and crunchy. But overall, the plants are looking good. They're flowering, and I see we have the beginnings of some pea pods. First of the peas, yay! I have random volunteer lettuces popping up everywhere. This lovely bushy fellow was a volunteer as well. So I haven't purposefully planted any lettuce seed this year. I'm just enjoying the volunteers. There's this big bushy one. There's another one here. There's a few in the compost bin you saw earlier. There's some here. They're just popping up everywhere. And now the peas are planted and getting watered. There's more lettuces in amongst the bottom of them. Lots of young lettuce seedlings. Sunflower seeds are all coming up. Well, not all of them. There's a few empty pots, probably from much older seed. And here I have a selection of squash seedlings. Honey Bear, Crown Prince, Delicata. Now Jumbo Pink Banana I thought was going to be a fail, but I can actually see a little bit of green. One plant's all you need, because the Jumbo Pink Bananas are jumbo. What have we got at the end there? Oh, a curry. And, oh, my squash seeds. They're probably from a big squash of mine. And in here we have some gherkins. So one no show. The rest of them are looking nice and healthy though. So back outside, here by the currant bushes, I've got a red currant in full leaf looking splendid, and next to it the black currant is still a very dormant twig. It's just starting to show the slightest hint of breaking those buds. There's nothing wrong with the black currant bush. I just thought it was interesting that the two different currant bushes break bud in the spring at very different times. This red currant bush has even got young fruits developing. And the black currant not even got leaves yet. Now I have noticed the red currant has got a few blistering aphid leaves, so I'm going to take those off now to lessen the spread of the aphids. I'll bring you in for a closer look so you can see what it looks like. So here's how the currant leaves should look, all lovely and green and nice. And if I scan down the plant, here we have some blistered leaves, all red and crinkly. And this is caused by blistering aphid. This plant's big enough and tough enough to cope with some aphid. But if I take these leaves off now and throw them in a black bin bag, there'll be a few less aphids to spread around the plant. Thankfully, the red currant bush doesn't seem to have too many blistered leaves just yet. But having taken those few off will help reduce the aphid population and stop it spreading too rampantly. The bush can survive with a hefty dose of aphids, to be honest, but it's a lot better off without them. Simply take off the leaves, put them in a black bin bag or burn them in a bonfire, Anything you can, just to stop those aphids spreading anymore. Now for most of the dahlias that I planted out in the new meadow garden, I have to admit there's not a lot happening. I was hoping I'd see a bit more germination by now, but this one is just showing its first signs of life. Little bits of leaf coming up here. So another week or two and hopefully the rest will be joining it. Well, back at the meadow garden, and I've got lots of plants to be getting in the ground. So I'm going to say goodbye for today and get these things planted. Bye for now. And remember, whatever you're doing, have fun doing it. Can I get you out this pot? Oh, this pot or not?
Well, I thought I'd finished filming for today, but apparently not. Here goes the first big plant into the new flowering meadow.
Well, it feels loose. First of their big plants going in this planting space. I'm going to call it the flower meadow. Eventually it won't really be a meadow, it'll be a flower garden. But it used to be a meadow, now it's going to be flowers. Oh, this is heavy and I don't want to break all its leaves. Should have done this in the winter, but I didn't.
In the winter, this peony would not have had all these lovely new green stems. I'm desperately trying to get it out of the pot without breaking them.
Yay! What I'm going to do first is clearing around it, taking off its weeds, going back in the pot. Last year's dead stems, break some of those off. Let's hope my hole's big enough. I think it is. I can't move it. There we go. Ah, lovely.
Now to fill back in around it with the soil I dug out of the hole.
So once I've got my new plants in the ground, I'm going to surround them with some grassy mulch. Now the grassy mulch I'm using to surround my precious new plants is dry grass, basically a hay. It is not the wet green grass I have been putting on the cardboard to suppress all the weeds in these beds before I plant anything. I'm only using dry grasses around my nice new plants. I use the freshly wet cut grass. It's absolutely perfect on top of our cardboard to kill off all the weeds, ready to give me a nice clear weed-free planting space. But I don't want to kill off my lovely precious plants, so I'm going to use a dry grass mulch. I just want to protect around the root base, keep the soil moist and keep the weeds out. The layer doesn't need to be quite as thick, and it's quite important that we use a dry grass, not a wet fresh grass clippings. Those wet fresh grass clippings will steal all the nitrogen and leave your plants hungry and weak. So only dry clippings, hay grass, to go down as a mulch around your precious plants. And the wet grass clippings are absolutely perfect if you're trying to suppress weeds. You can use dry grass clippings for suppressing weeds as well. Constantly mulching with the dry grass clippings also allows me to see where I have a plant, because I'll have these pockets of dry grassy mulch even when the plant has died back in the winter months. Hopefully I'll still be able to see where it's supposed to be. These new weed-free, fingers crossed, planting spaces should be a lot easier to maintain than the grassy meadow that things have been planted in up to now. Beautiful! First proper plant planted. That's not true. I planted all my dahlias the other week. First plant that looks like a plant. Now, let's get this space filled with the rest of them. I dug a massive stone out of that hole as well. Not sure where I'm going to put this beast. Up here for now. It's lovely to finally have a space planted with proper plants. I have been trying to choose things that should be deer and rabbit resistant. Even so, my smallest, most delicate specimens, I'm still protecting with wire baskets. I'm not risking my newly planted babies to the wildlife. I plan to put a wall of grass clippings all the way around the edge of this bed, the same as I did with the dahlia bed, to try and stop the pathway grasses growing their way into these beds. I'm also going to put some dry grass mulch on the surface to help stop the weeds coming up and keep the soil moist.
If you've enjoyed today's video, click that like button and let me know. Click subscribe and YouTube will make sure you see my next video. Bye for now and thanks for watching. And remember, whatever you're doing, have fun doing it.